In this video, I'm going to talk about the discussion section. The good news is it's almost over. The light is at the end of the tunnel. Once you've completed this section of the paper, you're done. You've completed your APA research paper. So we're almost there. Let's go into it. Let's start with the fact that this is a level 1 heading, meaning remember that this is centered and it's also in bold font. It's a level 1. Now there are 3 major components to the discussion section that we want you to include. You're not going to number this like this in the paper, but let's start with the first section of this discussion. And it's going to be labeled, I want you to have a heading here, it's going to be labeled expected results. Now this is a level 2 heading, meaning that it's left justified in bold font. Now, when you get to 624 and you are writing a final research paper, you're not going to label this expected results. We just want you to do it for this paper because we want you to talk about what results do you expect. Now, it is a little artificial to do this. In a normal research proposal, you will not have this section labeled expected results, and you wouldn't have a discussion about results that really didn't even occur yet. That's actually kind of the backwards way to do it. But there are important components here that we want you to include and critically think about, and that's why we have it here. So let's talk about what those are. The first and most important is this one bolded right here: interpret and explain the results. Now that's important because many people believe that in the results section, where they actually list the correlations or the t-test that you do or the numbers, that you explain the results there. That's not really the case. The results section, which you'll do for 624, you literally just list the results. You just provide the results. You don't interpret it at all until you get to here, until you get to the discussion section. So the purpose of this section is to interpret and explain the results that you have found for your paper. In this case, the results that you kind of expect to find, right? So what I need you to talk about is, do you expect your hypotheses are going to be confirmed? And more importantly, here's the kicker of it: how does the expected results and the hypotheses being confirmed fit with past theory and research? This is the component that I'm going to be looking for. I'm going to put another star next to this because that's how important it is. This is the component that I'm going to be looking for with regard to detail and support and things like that. So I need you to dig a little deeper here, and I need you to show me, illustrate in this section how your expected results fit with past theory and past research. What does that mean? That means, do your results, are they consistent with past work, with the past theory? Do they fit with the theory? If so, explain that. Say these results fit with this theory and provides further support for that theory. Explain whether or not your expected results are consistent with past research. Your results fit with Johnson & Johnson 2010, who found blah, 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 who found this and that. Or if it doesn't fit, you need to explain that as well. So either way, I need an explanation of how and why you think your results did or did not fit or were consistent with past work, meaning theory and research. It's a good idea to tie your past work, your results here with some theory. It's a good idea that you could try to find a theory that fits well. Hopefully you've done this already in your introduction. Find a theory that you can tie to, with your results. And of course, I know you did this in your introduction, your past research. So tie your expected results to that past research. Okay, the second heading that I want to see in this section, and this is again a level 2 heading, and you're not going to number it, but again, we're just keeping track, is limitations. In this section, you're going to discuss how internal and external validity might have been compromised with your procedures, your methodology. So some things to keep in mind, some things to discuss, right, are, maybe your sample, was the sample too small? Was the sample not representative of the general population? Did you only have access to males or only have access to females? These are things that would be threats to internal and external validity, and these are limitations to your study. Some things that kind of, if you want to think about it, hindered some potential results, and also hindered with external validity, it hindered your ability to generalize these findings to the greater population. For example, if you had only 10 students in your sample and they were only males, right, that's a big threat to external validity because, how representative is a small group of 10 males to, a population that's much larger and of course has females and males and so forth. Perhaps another thing that you can talk about with threats to internal and external validity are your measures. Did you create your own measures? If so, that should be listed as a limitation. Maybe you only had, one or two measures. Maybe you didn't have enough measures. So that could be another limitation. Maybe the measure you used wasn't a standardized measure, didn't have norms to which to compare your results to, and therefore that was a threat to internal and external validity. What about procedure? This is something else that could be a threat to internal and external validity. Maybe you didn't have enough time for study. Maybe maybe you only had 4 or 6 or 8 weeks to run the study. I know some of you are special education teachers who might not know on a consistent basis what students you're going to have from this month to the next month and so forth. So that certainly would be a threat to internal, external validity. So just some things to consider with procedure. Maybe there were issues around timing about testing and this and that threw off, the way this or that was done with your study. So I need you, the key point here is to dig really deep. I know it's really tempting just to focus on the easy thing, right? So if you only discuss, I had a really small sample to my population, that might be true, and that might be a very valid, sorry to use that pun here, it might be a viable threat to internal and external validity, very good, but I need you to dig a little deeper. There's more to it than just a sample. I'm pretty sure if you really sat and thought and critically analyzed your study, you would find additional limitations with regard to your measures, your procedure. Something in your methodology could have been done differently and or could have been done better. No study is a perfect study. There's always room for improvement. So don't feel like, if I mention these limitations, then that means that I didn't have a good study. That's not the case at all. We're just saying ways you can improve the study in the future is, I noticed that this and this and that could have been done a little differently, could have been done better. Hindsight's always 20/20. And it is a little artificial because these things would probably be much more apparent to you after running the study for real rather than right now. But we want you to think critically now so that you get in the habit of, again, critical thinking and thinking about research methods and research design by thinking about these things now. That's why we're including it in this paper for this course. So just try to dig a little deeper with that. So that concludes the second component. Okay, a third component to the discussion section for this paper is suggestions for future research. Now, your suggestions here should address, or if you want to think about it, answer all of the identified limitations that you just listed or discussed, in your previous section. Now, sometimes in research papers, this suggestions for future research is a separate heading, a separate subsection in the discussion, and that's fine if you do it that way. Actually, it's on the rubric to make this a separate heading, so that's fine if you want to follow that model. You probably have noticed through reading your articles that sometimes it's done a little differently, where it's actually combined with the limitations section. So all of these suggestions are just kind of intertwined in the limitations section, and that's fine too. Just make it explicit, make it really, really clear to the reader that here's a limitation and here's a suggestion. Otherwise, your instructor is going to have a very difficult time finding that. So for that reason, I would suggest that you probably just stick with this model, having the separate heading, so the reader, the instructor, knows very, very clearly where they need to go. But the key point here is be specific and say why this is a suggestion. So it's way too vague just to say something like, oh, well, you know, we should have a larger sample. Well, you know, my question to you as the researcher is, do you know your stuff, right? Do you know why? Why is a larger sample needed? How large? You know, what is the number that we need? If you included 10, are you just going to arbitrarily pick a number and say, oh, you know, you should have 20? You know, that really shouldn't be the case. You should have a specific number in mind that you've identified as the key number. There's a term in statistics known as power, and what that number means is a statistical test, very simple test that you can actually just do online, that you just plug in how many variables you have and so forth, and it tells you the power. It tells you how many, what's the exact number of people you need for that study to find results that are going to actually be meaningful. So anyway, be specific, have something in mind, but the important thing is say to the reader, explain to the reader rather, why something is a suggestion. If the time, for example, that you want the participants to do some treatment went from 2 weeks to 4 weeks, don't just arbitrarily say that. Say why more time was needed. You know, why was that important or necessary for the participant, and why do you think that this is going to render better results and so forth. So that's the thing. That's the thing that I'm going to be looking for as a reader, is your specificity and your rationalization for these suggestions. Okay, the fourth and final subsection of your discussion should be the implications section. Now note that this is not listed in the rubric, so you're not going to be specifically graded on this if you did or did not include this, but it's a good idea to include this. I want you to. I prefer that you do. And also note that it was an oversight that it wasn't included, and implications section will be included in future renditions of this course. So just for good practice, you're probably going to need to do this for your 624 class anyway, so might as well kind of think ahead now and think about implications. And there's two things to consider: is implications that your results, so this is implications of your findings or your results, implications of your findings on theory and on practice. So does it add to a theory? Meaning, does it expand upon a theory in some meaningful way? Does it further support? Does it lend further support to some theory? Talk about that. Does it add to some theoretical backbone? And then this might be an easier one to consider: is what are the implications for practice? Does it help students? And in what way does it do so? So explain how your findings are going to be helpful for the students, and because they're helpful, maybe you're suggesting that, that this treatment should be applied statewide or, district-wide or something. But maybe not just consider the students. What about teachers, of course? So not forget them. Parents, really all the players involved, how does it impact parents? How does it impact teachers? And talk about that. So this is the practical side to your findings, and talk about how it needs to, it's going to help this or change this and so forth. And then, does it lend itself to a theory and provide more support, or add to it in some other way, right? So that's the final step. Once you've completed all this section and got down there, you're done. So you finished your paper. The only thing left to do now is double check your references and so forth, which I'll make another video for, but that concludes this video.